it's an honor, to say the least. Before I start, so Dennis mentioned that I'm an anthropologist, and it occurs to me very often when I talk to people that a lot of people do not know what that means, right? What is an anthropologist? What do we actually do? So I wanted to share a little bit of that, like what anthropology did for me. It might be different for other people. But so how I got into this work was that I was interested in religion and spirituality, and of course, and how people search for meaning, how different cultures search for meaning. And obviously, as we saw already today, a lot of indigenous religions use a lot of psychoactive plants, and that's how I got into this. So the way I teach anthropology, the basic tenet is that humans construct their world, so we are looking at how humans construct their worlds through culture, which means, so when I say that something is culturally constructed, I don't mean that it doesn't exist. It does exist, but people construct the way what that means, basically, right? So, for example, we all have the same biological needs, right? But different cultures have chosen to do things differently in regards to these needs. So it's really, I came to the conclusion that there are so many perspectives in the world that are equally rational once you understand how they work in their own context. And that's what anthropology has done for me. So especially studying non-Western perspectives through this work, has challenged my own core cultural assumptions, right, of what is real or what is not. I mean, among other things, right? So this paper is based on research that I started with my dissertation field work on ayahuasca tourism, as Dennis said, in 2002, and it's developed into this ongoing project. And now I'm working on a book on sorcery, because that's where things went, which is a long story. I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But the first thing, so I did my field work in Iquitos that we've heard a lot about today. And the idea was, the question I wanted to answer was, why do Westerners pursue these experiences, and how do they construct them in the context of tourism, right? So, and as we've already heard, I mean, ayahuasca tourism has escalated in the last few decades, I mean, since the 90s at least, but in the last 10 years, actually, right after I finished the main period of my field work, it kind of exploded, basically, since 2005, I would say, around. So this is, I mean, we are experiencing something much more amplified than what I actually spend a lot of time studying. So things are changing so rapidly that some of the things you might, think that maybe that's not how things are today, right? So I started, there was a trip in 2002, but my main fieldwork period was from 2003 all the way to today. So what I did was I lived in Iquitos for a year and a half. And then there were some trips every other year after that. So I interviewed Western participants and several shamans in the area of Iquitos and in the city and around. So I asked, basically I was interested in why people do this and how do they construct it, as I said. So the main arguments back then that I made in my dissertation and in some publications is that tourism is not an anomaly, that shamanism is a dynamic phenomenon, because there was a lot of criticism right when I was writing this by some scholars criticizing Western engagement with these things. And the more I read the literature, and actually Manuel did a fantastic job showing us that there was intercultural exchange long before tourism, right? Obviously it was different, but this is not the first time there is contact between traditions, and especially shamanism. If you talk to shamans even today, they consider always knowledge acquired from other faraway, places or shamans more exotic and more powerful, right? Even they consider some groups that whites have a lot of power that they want to acquire. So that is not, problematic per se. Of course, what is problematic is that, power differences between the West and places like zones like the Amazon. But I found that there is a two-way intercultural exchange, right? There were some ideas seeping from the West into these traditions, but also a lot of ideas coming back to us, so that it was a two-way street. I also found that I call this shamanic tourism, actually, because it encompasses a lot more than actually going down there and drinking ayahuasca. I found that there were a lot of commonalities with pilgrimage. If you read literature on pilgrimage, there is a lot, the two reasons that people go on pilgrimages for are healing and personal transformation. And this is what I found that, the reasons that Westerners go and do this. But going back to why do I call this shamanic tourism? Because I don't like the word drug tourism because it refers to very different activities, like sometimes even for smuggling drugs or going to Amsterdam to participate to take drugs. That is not what's going on here. It was in the 90s, it was part of ecotourism. So these were optional ceremonies initially that were offered, and then fast forward to today, now there is dozens of specialized ayahuasca retreats, especially since 2005. And today we have this huge, I am sorry, I didn't note where I got this image, but if anyone knows, I found it to be very descriptive of what's going on today, the commercialization of ayahuasca and always being sold as this remedy that will fix everything that's wrong with our Western culture, right? But I want to, since I talked about Iquitos, but most of my work has been around there. I wanted to talk a little bit about its history, because as others today have pointed out, that has really shaped the ayahuasca tradition as we know it today, right? So we need to keep that in mind, that it was it's a contact. It has been for a long time a contact zone. It was founded by missionaries. The name comes from a particular ethnic group. It became an important port because it was at the beginning of the Amazon River, basically, for exporting things and goods from the jungle. And others have already mentioned the rubber boom that has really, really disrupted. I mean, not that there was no, again, as we heard from Manuel today, there was a lot of movement of populations before, but the rubber boom really, really disrupted the landscape, the ethnic landscape of the area. And today, the tourism is actually, since a lot of these, since the rubber boom collapsed, it was a very prosperous time for Iquitos, right? There was a tramway, there was an opera, there was all this wealth that was generated on the backs of indigenous peoples, and there were atrocities committed. So again, because I'm going to talk about Amazonian worldviews and how they kind of come through in today's ayahuasca practices. We need to keep in mind how that landscape was shaped by this history, right? How all this contact between groups happened. And it was also, a traumatic time, and you can see evidence of that in Iquitos. You see, those tiled buildings with, tile that was brought from Europe, that shows the wealth that existed at that time. And then, you have these, so it's a contact zone where modernity coexists with these, magical tales. The last picture there is an artist's rendition of the myth of the Bufeo Colorado, the pink dolphin. That basically, the myth is that people tell a lot in the area that pink dolphins turn into men and have sex with human women, and they give birth to pink dolphins, and those men are white men. So I think that's very significant, and that tells that story of the trauma and how it's still there in the form of these stories, right? And of course, after you walk down a few blocks from where all these nice, buildings are, and the people live in, Iquitos attracts a lot of people from the jungle that are looking for, jobs, and they live in conditions where there is no running water, no electricity. So there is a lot of that we need to keep in mind. A lot of poverty, a lot of envy. That's going to be significant in a bit when I talk about the context within ayahuasca is used. But I want to talk today about the plants that are used around ayahuasca. A lot of our focus has been on the ayahuasca brew and the vine and the chacruna and how they work together. We know more about that than about the other plants and the worldviews that go with them. And one of the things that I found really important is that how Amazonian conceptions of the body, right? And how basically the idea is that we tend to see bodies as this biological fact, right? They're an objective biological fact. In the Amazon, they don't necessarily see them that way. They are constantly made with the ingestion of certain substances. Like throughout your life, you constantly construct your body through ingesting certain substances. So the idea is that a lot of these things that we talk about are not necessarily, that I will talk about, are not necessarily taken to change your consciousness. So that when we use the word drugs, and I looked at different definitions, and most are some version of something that will change your consciousness, something like that. So a lot of the things that are used in the context that I will talk about today are not about changing your consciousness. They're about changing your body, right? So for example, and a lot of them we wouldn't consider psychoactive, right? So for example, in some, so the Kashinawa initiate boys into hunting through a prolonged diet. So diets are not necessarily a shamanic, something that only shamans do. And they begin the diet with using the frog skin that was mentioned today to cleanse the body. And then they kill a boa to eat its tongue. And that is, the idea is, and that, you see, they don't do this just with plants, right? To embed the body with certain qualities. So in this case, the idea is that the boa's qualities are transmitted to the hunter, so they will be able to hunt larger game. So a lot of that, so I will barely scratch the surface here, but I just wanted to give you enough examples to see that this is pretty pervasive. So, and perspectivism that Luis Eduardo Luna mentioned today is really at the center of this, in my opinion, because what perspectivism means is that all living beings basically have a soul, right? They're all human, or at least they were human at a certain time. So we're all people, right? But what makes us different are our bodies, not our souls, right? So that makes a lot of sense then when you think of what I said with, embedding the body with different qualities. So that explains why the emphasis is on fabricating the body as opposed to something else, right? Another example is for people for the Naporuna, they drink. Basically, they consider any drunkenness in general as a way to open the body to the spirit world, so that your essence is manifest. So it's not something. It's something. Drunkenness is positive. It's a way to attain knowledge. And again, there is an emphasis on changing one's body over their lives, basically to, especially making it stronger. And where the body's power is the flesh for the Naporuna. Walker also talks about how the bodies are perceived as leaky and permeable. Right? That's why you need to ingest medicines and remedies to and keep certain prohibitions to strengthen the body and make it and to protect it from that original state of permeability. So when a child is born, all this long process starts of making that body, of strengthening it and embedding a soul in the body. So again, with the hunting, for example, with spearfishing in this case, actually, they put these, the bark of the, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, bihurara tree around the forearm, and that leaves scars, and that, there is also practice, of course, that comes with it, but the use of the bark is really important. Descola also, when he talks about shamanic apprenticeship, he talks about how basically it means to change the ecology of the physical system of the person who is becoming a shaman. And that takes the ascetic discipline, purging, and diet. You already see a theme that we see today in the diets. And Kristen Hugh Jones, when she talked about the Bharasana theory of the body, she says that they put a lot of value on the regulation of exits and entrances. I will leave that to your imagination to figure out what that means. So, and the last example from the literature, and again, there's many more, there's gonna be more in the paper. Chevalier says that any healing prescriptions center around the same theme. One is that the patient must refrain from cultural exchanges with other person. So if you think about contemporary dietas where, sex is not allowed, there's spatial isolation and things like that. So he says the idea is to refrain from anything cultural, and the same goes with food. Like the foods that are prohibited are anything that is cooked or valued by people, but it's quite superfluous, like spices and salt and things like that, and alcohol and sugar. I'm going to move on to how healing was perceived. So these, already you see that the typical Western mind-body dichotomies do not really apply here, so it makes it a little difficult for Westerners when they engage with this to think in those terms, right? That you're changing your body. And I found that today, so when I was doing my dissertation fieldwork, this is how illness is perceived in curanderismo around Iquitos, right? It's perceived as having 3 dimensions, so there is already that separation, right? That physical, psychological, and spiritual. I mean, there's still the idea that all of this has an effect, that the psychological and the spiritual will have an effect on the body, but there is also a conceptual separation, right? A categorization there. And another thing that, so these are the 2 sides of contemporary shamanism, the way I found it, was the one side is the healing and the other side is the sorcery, and both have to do, meaning in the end, both happen in the body. So sorcery, what I mean by sorcery is like harming someone intentionally, and in this tradition that happens usually through the use of magic darts or other objects that are embedded in the body of the victim. That ends up manifesting as sickness in the body. So a lot of the work that shamans do around Iquitos is really about healing sorcery. There is also a lot of what I call shamanic warfare between shamans that are fighting each other for either for power or competition and things like that. So a lot of effort goes even today to fortify and protect the body from sorcery, right? So a lot of the dietas that happen today are to protect the body from sorcery. So a lot of people have mentioned, and I'm glad, I mean, you already see that even though we didn't coordinate, all of us have mentioned today the importance of studying all these plants that either go into the ayahuasca brew, but I'm going to argue also the plants that are used around it, you know, in the different practices. And that's just an example. This is not my area. What I was interested in was why people use these things, and what's the meaning behind them, what's the rationale, right? So the idea with the additives especially was that they added them to the brew to kind of embed the brew with the energetic qualities of the plant. So some of the additives that people I interviewed used were mapacho, which is the tobacco that they use in the area, and you see the reasons why they were using these plants. The mapacho was for strength and protection. Toe, which is the Brookmansia that people mentioned, was added for strength. And these are minute quantities that are added to the brew, right? So, and that is not my area. It is, I'm not sure how much of a pharmacologic effect they would have, I mean, but they were added for, like I said, for energetic, for the qualities. So ayauma is a tree that was the bark of which some people added, again, for protection. Capirona for cleansing and protection, and Chuyachaki caspi for cleansing and healing. Lupuna blanca for protection. You see a lot of need for protection, as I said. So another one is punga amarilla that was also added for protection or drawing out negative energies and spirits. Remo caspi, I was told, was to move dense or dark energies that might be in the body. And white caspi to create purging, fix maybe gastrointestinal ailments and calmness and tranquility. Uchusanango for protection, again, power and strength, and Shiwanaku for healing and protection. These plants are in the literature that some people mentioned with their botanical names. The most important plant that is used in this tradition, in conjunction with ayahuasca, is mapacho, right, which is a species of tobacco of the Nicotiana rustica, and is considered in the area to be a very powerful spirit. It's ever present in ayahuasca rituals. It's blown on the brew while it's made. It's blown on any instruments that are used in the ritual. It's on the patients, on the shaman themselves. It's supposed to be a very protective spirit. Some people diet it, some people don't. I mean, there is different traditions, different lineages around Iquitos. Recently, unfortunately, there have been some deaths surrounding ayahuasca, and there is a lot of controversy about what exactly happened. The little that I know points to probably tobacco intoxication, right? So this is one more reason that while we need to study the tobacco use in this context more, because more and more people will go down and do tobacco cleanses before ayahuasca ceremonies and things like that, and we don't know how much knowledge these people have. I would recommend, I think the best source on tobacco use in indigenous cultures in Amazonia is by Johannes Wilbert, Tobacco and Shamanism in South America. And I will mention some examples to show that, the different ways that it was used and by how many groups. So he stressed the ritual aspect, and obviously, in appropriate dosages, it was used as a way to activate the jaguar self in the shaman in some groups. So the jaguar transformation. In Kampa shamanism, it was used as a hallucinogen in high doses. The Machigenga word for shaman is seripigari, which is the one intoxicated, which means the one intoxicated by tobacco, which shows how important it is. And the shuar also ingested for 3 reasons. So there's different reasons why people will use tobacco. They use it as a universal remedy or as a prophylactic to strengthen the body, like many of the plants I mentioned, and as a narcotic to induce dreams. In some cases, it's used in initiations in order to experience symbolic death. The ayoreo, and most of this is from Wilbert, actually. The ayoreo use it, actually the apprentice will drink a liter of pulverized green tobacco and fall into a coma. So that's part of the initiation. And if they survive, they become a shaman. The Shipibo will also ingest great quantities of tobacco water to acquire their powers. And they also use other techniques like chewing, drinking, smoking, and snuffing and enema. So there is a lot of ways to do that. And some of the groups that use it are like the campo that I mentioned, Jíbaro, Piro, Machiguengas, Shipibo, and Tucuna. And all of these groups also use ayahuasca. So again, I think it's important to look at the entire context and the body of knowledge around ayahuasca. So today, like I said, it's used in ceremonies in the way I described, but there's also specialists in the area that are called tabaqueros, right? That basically, and it's really interesting, you get a very different story when you talk to an ayahuasquero and a very different story when you talk to a tabaquero. So for tabaqueros, obviously tobacco is the most powerful spirit. They think ayahuasca shamans are very weak, but also they acknowledge that tobacco is too powerful for some people, right? So but there is a whole tradition there of tabaqueros, right? That I think is also would be a fruitful research avenue. So another aspect I want to discuss is the dietas. Like a lot of people who will go down to participate in, and I'm not talking about the ayahuasca diet that people have to observe before and after, right? These are part of the shamanic apprenticeship or a way of learning. They have become part of ayahuasca retreats. It's a way of learning directly from the plants. And as I mentioned, there is fasting and isolation for, any period of time. Sometimes it could be a week, a month, or longer. And some, I'm going to talk a little bit about what people have told me, the people I've worked with. They've told me that there are different reasons to diet a plant. So the idea is that you, at the beginning of the diet, of the dieta, you ingest a plant, and then you might not, some people will ingest it for the first few days and then they just observe the diet, or they will just ingest it the first day and they will observe the diet for the amount of time that the shaman has recommended, and they might do it for healing or to learn medicine or sorcery. There's that, there's all kinds of knowledge that can be accessed through that. So the idea also is to, besides the very strict diet where you have a very bland diet that I mentioned before, where you don't have anything spicy or greasy, or you are also supposed to avoid physical activity. Basically, you need to spend a lot of time in your hammock and behave like you were a sick person. Sometimes they even discourage from reading or doing any intellectual activity. I was constantly, for me it was great because I was so focused and I could read so much in a day, but I was constantly being told, you need to stop that intellectual stuff. You need to be more introspective and things like that. So you're supposed to be reflecting and learning. So during these dietas, people also drink ayahuasca maybe every other day or every few days, right? And this is like there is different opinions on that. Some people told me that it's dangerous to do that when you're dieting, because then you're visible to sorcerers and you're more vulnerable, while if you don't take ayahuasca, you're more protected. But for the most part, people will routinely do that today, right? A lot of, I mentioned tabaqueros before. There is also a tradition of ayahuasqueros paleros, like especially some of the plants I mentioned before that they put as additives. A lot of them are trees. Paleros are the ones that use a lot of those trees. They also consider themselves more powerful than just plain ayahuasqueros, which is really interesting. But what I think the takeaway point is that there's so many traditions, a huge body of knowledge. Different lineages have different rules for diets, or different norms, or especially about what they're supposed to be eating and not. Some will eat certain kinds of fish and not other kinds of fish, and that's because, or animals for that matter, because for the same reason that you're taking the plants to embed their qualities in your body, you run the risk when you are, for example, in some lineages, they will not allow fish that has teeth because that would, maybe transfer aggressiveness to the person. So there is a lot of that ideology of being very careful of what you consume during that time, because it's a very risky situation. You might take on qualities that you don't want. Also, if you don't follow the diet strictly, traditionally in all of the groups that I mentioned, you might have the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve, right? If you don't follow the diet to the end, you might be trying to be brave and be really, really the opposite of brave if you don't do what you're supposed to do. So this is a really, really serious matter traditionally. And where was I? Yeah, the idea is that the spirits of the trees or the plants or whatever you are dieting will enter your body and will teach you literally from the inside out. So I think that relates to what was said today about perspectivism too, that you start seeing the world from the perspective of another being. Also, in the tradition that I'm most familiar with, they require that you bathe really, really early in the morning, that you immerse yourself in the cold water. In some traditions, you're supposed to bathe multiple times a day to strengthen the body. Again, and if these things are broken, consequences might occur. And they might occur in the next ceremony. You might be punished from the spirits and things like that. Another interesting thing that I found with this is that usually people will diet one plant at a time, right? Because you're learning from this one spirit and you want to familiarize yourself with that spirit and its qualities and all of that. But there are some lineages that will actually allow people to diet more plants at a time. And I wonder if that is kind of a sign of, this very fast capitalist society where we want to learn more fast because, you're in the Amazon maybe for a week and you want to make the most of it. So I've heard of a lot of cases where people will diet multiple plants at a time. Others really frown upon that. They think that's not possible. It's not possible to learn properly like that because you wouldn't know which plant is doing what. So there's different schools of thought, to say the least, right? And there's different ideas about what each plant. There is, For example, ahosacha is a plant that I was told they diet to treat problems of general discomfort and pain, and it generates heat in the body, and again, strengthens the body, gives you physical strength. But I was also told that the same plant might have different effects on different people. So context, who is dieting, and in what context also plays a role, and I think we should also be paying attention to that. Even clinical trials in the West, you have different results with different patients. So this is something we need to keep in mind. As an example, I've been working with this Spanish shaman. So he was trained, obviously, in the mestizo tradition with shaman in Iquitos. And I've been working with him over the years for more time. So I know him more intimately. We're working on a book on sorcery together because it's played a huge role in his life. So we talked about, the last time I was in Peru a couple of years ago, we talked a lot about, because we did a diet, like we dieted the Ayahuasca tree that's in the picture, whose spirit is perceived as a headless giant. And he told me that it's taken to strengthen the body, but it also teaches sorcery, right? So I was a little concerned about that. But he said that if you, again, the same plant, it also depends on your intention. He said, first of all, you need to take things like, to diet plants like that, to know how to counter sorcery if something happens. And also he said, if you just want to learn how to counter sorcery, you just diet it for a shorter time, so you don't go into the dark arts, I suppose, that some people call them. So he said that it's a good, even now that he's a practicing ayahuasquero, it's good to do a diet at least once a year to cleanse the body and center himself. And he said it's a good tool for anyone to reflect over their lives, any patterns that they might need to change. So you already see possibly a Western influence there, right? That it's used in a slightly different, at least it's conceptualized a little differently. But I want to read a quote by one of our conversations. He said, these plants have their genios, which is the spirits, basically. When you're dieting these 8 days without salt, without sugar, as we are now, that's when we were doing a diet, and you have taken the plant and the plant is in you, you're allowing that plant to develop in you. That month that you do not do certain things, that's because, I mean, even when you continue to have some restrictions after, like even if you do a 1-week diet. So you continue to have some restrictions afterwards. Let's say, so he says that month that you don't do certain things, it's the valorization that you're going to give to that plant. If you're dieting well, then the spirit of that plant will be with you. If it is to cure a disease, it will help you cure the disease. If it is in your hands and in God's hands to heal it. If it is to learn every time you need that plant in any caro or something to heal someone, you will have the strength and power of that medicine in you. So you see what I was talking about before, like the idea of that you're embedding the medicine in your body and it's with you forever as long as you keep certain restrictions. So this is a contemporary understanding of diet. So he continues to say that there are many types of diets. There are diets for more protection, more guardian spirits, diets that serve to heal bones, muscles, or organs, others that enhance your spirituality, others to strengthen you physically or mentally. And he says each plant has its way. Ultimately, if we focus and welcome each plant, letting it take us to what the medicine gives us, I believe that the same plant can give a person one thing from another. That's why I do not focus so much on what the plant is for, because I have seen that the same plant, which is being eaten by the same people, doing the same thing, eating the same thing, doing the same ayahuasca ceremonies, to some people it brings certain things, and to others something different. But ultimately, the purpose of the diets is to heal for most people. But he also learned when he spent time in the jungle and then exchanging knowledge with other ayahuasqueros or tabaqueros, or there's even today an exchange of knowledge between shamans that respect each other and consider the other an ally. So he found out from them that sorcerers will diet certain plants to learn sorcery. But again, like I said, it's good. But he will still try, especially in light of some recent events, that he tries to diet some of these plants in order to counteract sorcery and protect himself, basically. And he found out from these other ayahuasqueros, or some tabaqueros in the area actually, that if he diets these plants for a shorter time, he will learn how to protect himself but not go into these, other areas that he doesn't want to. And he did, there was a time in his life where, actually several times, but before, months before, this diet that we did, he did almost die. He had a very hard time, and that he attributes to sorcery attacks. And he did do a very strong tobacco diet, and accompanied with ritual baths with this plant that you probably know as elephant's ear. It's called patiquina in the area. So he did this bath. So he dieted tobacco, and at the same time, he had this ritual bath with patiquina, toe, and some tobacco in the bath too. And that is, again, to strengthen and protect the body. And he actually says that after this, he did feel stronger, safer, and protected. And when he was attacked during ceremonies, he was still being attacked, but he was able to counter those attacks without putting himself into danger. So when we actually dieted the ayauma that I showed you before, this is still the bath, it was because that was in 2013, there was a string of attacks that happened during ceremonies, and I was there, and during one of them, he actually fell on the ground. He didn't have the physical strength to actually continue the ceremony. He was in physical pain. And there was a lot of that going on. That was the most severe one. So he was told, and he remembered from his teacher, that ayauma is a good plant to diet. And since I was working with him, and I was perceiving what was going on in the ceremony, he thought I needed to diet that as well. So that's how we got to both of us dieting the ayauma. And the part of the diet was also, so we drank, he put the bark of the tree in water, and we drank that water in the next morning. We also had to bathe with the fruit of the plant that you saw here. Like, you pop it open. It has actually a very interesting scent, and we rubbed our bodies with that, so for extra protection. On top of that, of the attacks that he was having that year, when I arrived in Iquitos, and that's when we had already decided that we're consciously working on this project together, writing a book. He felt that the attacks were because people didn't, or certain people didn't want us to do this project. So I got sick immediately after arrival to Iquitos, and I didn't know what was going on. So I think, I had diarrhea at first, and then I think I got dehydrated so much from it that I got a bladder infection, but I didn't realize until my body was shutting down, and he took me to the hospital and they figured it out. And gave me massive amounts of antibiotics. But he interpreted all of this, having all these obstacles as, you know, the result of sorcery, and we had to fortify ourselves through this diet. He also gave me camalonga, which is another plant, to heal myself because of my ordeal. And yeah, we had, like I said, during that diet, we had a lot of discussions about what diets mean and what healing means. And his advice for me was that to focus on the illness and see if what's the reason for it, to meditate and think about it, and ask the illness why it's there, what gift are you bringing me, and things like that. So, and he was talking about maybe going at the root of the illness that he perceived that was not physical, right? So he also saw dieting as an exercise in his own power, like being able to discipline yourself for certain amounts of time. That was an exercise in his own power. And I will finish with, my next visit that was in 2015 was when another misfortune happened to me so the night before we were supposed to go to the jungle to diet and take ayahuasca, my purse with my passport was stolen, which was devastating because I couldn't leave the country, I couldn't go back to the States, right? And of course, it was immediately, I had to go to Lima and do the paperwork and then came back while waiting for my passport to come from Greece. But it was immediately between him and this is a tabaquero that they're supporting each other basically. They were both really concerned that this was all, their shamanic intervention was needed. So I had to go through the same. Well, I didn't diet tobacco because I think he also agreed that it's too strong for me, that I should probably not do it. But they did the whole. So what they had me do was take ojé, which is the resin of another plant that is taken for cleansing. It's really, really brutal. You take it in the morning. It's kind of like this milky sap that doesn't taste bad, but then you have to drink massive amounts of water, so you vomit and, you remember the exits and entrances. So, and that is basically a whole day ordeal that they felt, I had to do to cleanse myself, to fortify myself, and be protected from things like that in the future. And of course, I did the ritual bath with the patiquina. Actually, the patiquina is, when I mentioned this to my friends in Iquitos when I went back, they said, oh yeah, but everybody knows the patiquina is a protective plant. Like you have it, you can have it next to your door and that will deflect, certain things. So hopefully that worked, we'll see. So far, so good. But ojé, to finish with that, ojé is mentioned in the literature. Luis has mentioned it too as a powerful plant teacher, and sometimes it's used to, of course, get rid of parasites and things. But these guys are using it to, basically what he told me was that after this you're going to feel like new, you're going to shine, you're going to be, basically a new person. So, I've been speaking for at least 45 minutes, so I'm gonna cut this short. So according to Stephen Hugh Jones, an anthropology, what he calls an anthropology of peculiar substances, which is what I think it's a nice way to talk about what we're doing here. Might usefully begin by thinking more about the consumption of stimulants or psychoactive substances in relation to the consumption of more ordinary fare. So he suggests focusing on ethnographic evidence on behavior and social interaction, and a more cultural approach focusing on categorization. In this case, so even though a lot of the plants I mentioned are not considered psychoactive, some of them are used in that sense in this context. Or at least they could teach us a lot about Amazonian worldview that I feel, what I found over the years is that a lot of that gets lost in translation. A lot of our focus is on healing and personal transformation, and there is a lot of lessons we're missing from Amazonian worldview that I think can be really valuable, especially all the stuff about the body that I talked about. So it's important so basically, what I'm saying is that it's important to study the context of these things, all the things that come, the worldviews and the ideologies that come with it. Look at all this, also look at all these different specialists that there's a lot of knowledge specialization in the Amazon, the different types of plants they use. At least the tabaqueros and the paleros are pretty widespread in Iquitos. So basically, we need to look at these things more holistically, and from the perspective of the practitioners as well as the patients. So, and like I said, not only do they use a variety of interventions like the baths and the cleanses and all these other things, there is probably a lot of knowledge because of that focus on ayahuasca right now that might be lost in the future. So I think we should, like others have said today, I'm going to amplify that we need to focus more on these other, studying these other plants within their context, obviously, and especially understanding local conceptions of the body and to understand how these modalities work. So I think this, especially this forum, this symposium, is a great opportunity for that interdisciplinary dialogue to start. Not that it's not happening, but I think we can do more of that. And of course, as I mentioned, we need to study more the risks associated with using some of these things, because a lot of what I've seen with some of the deaths that have happened over the last few years is that a lot of people the conversation stops at ayahuasca is very safe and there is no risk, but there's all these other things that are used in conjunction with ayahuasca that I have a good reason to believe that might be responsible or contributing to these deaths, so we need to study those as well. So that was my talk. Thank you.